There's a moment in every life when a person tries to outrun the past. For Eleanor Whitmore, that moment came one cold, restless morning in early October. The sky was flat and gray, the air so still that every step crunched against the dry forest floor like a secret breaking. She'd driven out before sunrise, pushing her Mercedes SUV far down the winding gravel roads that cut into the wildest corner of the Black Pines Reserve. No one followed her, but she glanced at the rearview mirror anyway, expecting... what? A memory, a ghost, a consequence she couldn't name. Magnum, her prized thoroughbred, was restless in the horse trailer. Every time Eleanor hit a bump, she heard him shift and stomp, a muted protest. She pressed her lips together and focused on the way the headlights sliced through the dark. She told herself it was the right thing to do, maybe even an act of mercy. Still, her hands trembled on the wheel. At 38, Eleanor looked every bit the successful American businesswoman. Tailored coat, expensive boots, not a hair out of place. But inside, she felt hollow. The past year had stripped her of trust, warmth, and every illusion she'd ever held about loyalty. Her business partner, someone she'd once called a friend, had betrayed her, nearly ruining everything she'd built. In the aftermath, Eleanor closed herself off, convinced that weakness invited disaster. Magnum became a symbol of everything she wanted to forget: vulnerability, hope, and the part of her that still craved connection. The road ended in a clearing, deep among ancient pines and shivering aspens. No houses, no cell service, no judgmental eyes. Just the forest, and the uneasy knowledge that this place belonged to the wild. Eleanor climbed out, breath steaming in the cold, and went to the trailer. She opened the door. Magnum backed out, proud and confused, his chestnut coat gleaming in the early light. She led him by the halter, not looking into his eyes. She found a sturdy pine and tied him there, her fingers stiff as she looped the rope, making the knot tighter than it needed to be. Her mind raced. Just leave him, turn around, don't think, don't feel. But the forest was alive. Somewhere beyond the clearing, a pack of wolves began to howl, long and mournful, as if mourning something lost. The sound sliced through Eleanor's composure. She flinched, heart pounding. Magnum pricked his ears, stamping the ground, muscles tensing as if ready to bolt. Eleanor's mind flashed with every story she'd ever heard. Wolves as monsters, as omens, as creatures waiting for weakness. She shivered, told herself it didn't matter. Nature would take care of it. She almost believed it. Almost. She backed away, crunching over fallen branches, her pulse wild. Every step away from Magnum felt heavier, as if the forest itself watched. She made it to her car, opened the door, hesitated, then slammed it shut, unable to drive off just yet. Through the windshield, she watched the clearing. Magnum's breath curled in the air. The howls echoed again, closer now. She told herself, "Don't look back." But her eyes betrayed her. The light was fading, shadows growing long. She thought about driving home, about locking her heart away for good, about the meetings and the city and the empty glass of wine she'd pour to silence her guilt. But she couldn't move. Not yet. As dusk settled in, the howls grew into a chorus. One by one, sleek gray shapes slid out from the trees, circling the clearing. Eleanor's throat closed. 5, no 6, wolves, big as shadows, moving with that strange, confident grace of creatures who have never known doubt. They surrounded Magnum, who stood still, only his eyes betraying fear. Eleanor pressed a fist to her lips. She wanted to run out, to shout, to drive the wolves away. But she couldn't move. She watched, frozen, as the pack advanced. The lead wolf, bigger than the rest, with a jagged scar down its muzzle, stepped forward, nose twitching. For a moment, everything hung in perfect silence. Then, something unexpected happened. The wolves did not attack. Instead, the pack seemed to pause, regarding Magnum with an intelligence Eleanor couldn't explain. The lead wolf circled, close enough that Eleanor expected fangs and fury. Instead, the wolf stopped, dipped its head, almost a bow. The others followed, forming a circle around the horse. Magnum did not rear, did not run. He lowered his head, meeting the wolf's gaze. For a heartbeat, it looked like a ritual, ancient and unknowable. Eleanor's breath caught. Was she imagining things? Projecting her own desperation onto the scene? She shook her head, tried to dismiss the feeling. The wolves stood watch all night. Eleanor remained in her car, fighting the urge to intervene, trapped by fear and fascination. She could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the circle, predators and prey, locked in a silent conversation older than any story she'd ever heard. When morning came, the wolves vanished into the trees, leaving Magnum unharmed but changed, quieter, prouder, as if he'd passed a test. Eleanor stepped out, legs shaking. She didn't untie Magnum, not yet. Instead, she touched his neck, whispering an apology that was too late and too small. Above them, the forest was silent, as if waiting for Eleanor to decide who she wanted to be. The woman who ran from her mistakes, or the one who dared to face them. She wiped her eyes, breathed in the cold, wild air, and realized this was only the beginning. Eleanor tried to convince herself that everything would fade with daylight. The logic of the city would return. The wildness of the night would shrink to a story she could lock away. But when the first pale rays crept through the trees, she knew better. Her world had shifted. She wasn't ready to face it. And yet, she couldn't leave Magnum. Not after what she'd seen. By noon, guilt gnawed at her so fiercely she could barely focus on the winding drive home. The vision of the wolves, the circle, the strange peace haunted every mile. Her mind played tricks, whispers that maybe she hadn't seen what she thought she'd seen, that maybe she'd imagined the wolves' strange deference, the ritual that had frozen her in awe. But another part of her, the part that had once believed in magic, insisted it was real. That afternoon, Eleanor found herself pacing her glass-walled living room, every surface slick with wealth and order, every edge sharp and cold. The city noises, a distant siren, a neighbor's television, felt artificial. She looked at the framed awards and diplomas on her wall, the symbols of a life built on certainty and dominance. Suddenly, they seemed meaningless. Unable to focus, Eleanor packed a bag with practical things: a flashlight, sturdy boots, a thermos of coffee, a half-empty pack of trail mix. She told herself it was curiosity, not guilt, that drove her back toward the woods. Maybe she just needed closure. Maybe she wanted to make sure Magnum was okay, and that she hadn't doomed him to a fate worse than the loneliness she herself had chosen. By the time she reached the edge of the Black Pines Reserve again, the sun was already dipping, coloring the sky in bruised purples and oranges. She parked at the same clearing, heart pounding in her chest, and crept forward on foot, boots crunching over last year's leaves. As she drew near, she heard a low chorus, almost a hum, rising from the trees. In the growing dusk, Eleanor stopped, hidden behind a thick stand of firs. She could just make out the shapes in the clearing. Magnum, untied but unmoving, stood tall in the center, his head high, his eyes fixed on something beyond Eleanor's view. Surrounding him, the wolf pack was gathered again, silent, moving in a slow, deliberate circle. This time Eleanor stayed quiet, blending into the shadows. She felt like an intruder, watching a ceremony meant for older eyes, eyes that understood the language of the wild. The wolves and the horse circled each other, neither dominant nor submissive, a balance of tension and respect. No one attacked. No one ran. It was a scene so out of place in her world that Eleanor found herself holding her breath. Suddenly, a voice, a crackling, deliberate sound, cut through the hush. "You're trespassing on something older than you know." Eleanor nearly jumped out of her skin. She spun around and found herself face to face with a woman she hadn't seen approach. The woman was older than the trees themselves, it seemed, her silver hair tied in a thick braid, her eyes sharp as hawks. She wore a patchwork coat and boots mended with pieces of old tires, standing straight as a sapling despite her years. I'm sorry," Eleanor managed, embarrassment and fear making her stammer. "I was just... my horse." The woman cut her off with a soft laugh, neither cruel nor kind. "Your horse isn't yours anymore," she said, nodding toward the circle. "You gave him to the wild last night. Sometimes the wild gives back. Sometimes it doesn't." Eleanor stared, trying to find some rational explanation. "Who are you?" she finally asked. "Delacroix," the woman replied, as if the name itself should answer everything. She tilted her head, her gaze landing on the wolf pack. "You saw the ritual, didn't you?" Eleanor nodded. Delacroix's expression grew grave. "Old stories, child. Wolves and horses, guardians of the wild balance. People think the forest is chaos, but it's all circles, bargains, and pacts older than any law you know. You break the pact, there's a price." Lightning flashed in the distance. Too sudden, too sharp. A rumble of thunder followed, rolling over the pines. The sky began to darken with gathering clouds. "We need to find shelter," Delacroix said. "Storm's coming, and when the wild's uneasy, best you don't wander alone." Before Eleanor could protest, a cold wind whipped through the clearing. Magnum pawed the earth, and the wolves scattered, melting into the forest's gloom. The sky opened, rain pelting down in heavy sheets. Delacroix took Eleanor's arm, her grip surprisingly strong, and led her along a narrow, twisting path deeper into the woods. Branches lashed at their faces, mud pulled at their boots. Eleanor stumbled, but Della held her steady, guiding her to a mossy cabin hidden beneath low, ancient boughs. Inside, it smelled of herbs, wood smoke, and something else. Earth, maybe, or memory. Della busied herself lighting candles and setting a kettle on the stove, moving with the certainty of someone who belonged to every inch of her world. As the storm raged outside, Eleanor watched through a fogged window. Lightning flickered, illuminating the forest in sharp, strange bursts. For a moment she saw shapes. Wolves pacing between the trees. Magnum standing with his head raised, unafraid. The world outside the cabin was alive, electric, balanced on a knife's edge between fear and awe. That night, trapped by rain and mystery, Eleanor listened as Della told stories. Old legends of wolves and horses, of humans who tried to control nature and paid dearly. The cabin creaked and groaned with the storm, but Eleanor felt something shift inside her. She saw for the first time the wild not as something to conquer or fear, but as a place where she might begin to understand herself. When sleep finally came, Eleanor dreamed not of betrayal or loss, but of circles, horse and wolves, storm and silence, endings and beginnings, echoing through the forest long after the thunder faded. Morning crept into the cabin with a gentle gray light, filtered through thick clouds and rain-slick pine boughs. For a moment, Eleanor forgot where she was. The familiar ache in her chest, the relentless buzz of her phone, the pressure to perform, gone, replaced by the steady hush of nature waking up. Only when she reached for her phone and found no signal did memory return. The forest, the storm, the wolves, the old woman named Della Crow. Della was already awake, stoking the embers of the wood stove, humming a song with no words. Eleanor sat up stiffly on the makeshift cot. Every muscle ached from the night before, racing through the woods, bracing against the cold. Still, something inside her felt lighter. "You slept," Della observed, setting a chipped mug of strong black coffee on the table. "That's more than most city folks manage their first night out here." Eleanor took the mug, cradling it in both hands. She hesitated, then blurted out the question that had haunted her all night. "Last night, was it real? The wolves, my horse, the way they moved together. It felt like a dream." Della smiled, deep wrinkles folding around her eyes. "The old ways don't care if you believe. They simply are. Out here, things speak their own language. Most people spend their lives refusing to listen." She poured herself some coffee, glancing out the rain-streaked window. "Your horse, Magnum, right, is still here. He's safe. For now." Eleanor exhaled, relief flooding through her. Guilt mixed with hope, a sharp, confusing tangle. After breakfast, Della pulled on her battered boots and beckoned Eleanor outside. The storm had broken, leaving behind a forest washed clean. The air sparkled with the scent of wet leaves and moss. Eleanor spotted Magnum grazing near the cabin, his coat slick and shining. He raised his head, meeting her eyes for the first time since the night in the clearing. She approached slowly, careful not to startle him. "Hey, boy," she murmured. Her voice trembled. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have left you. I was scared. Of everything." Magnum nickered softly. Eleanor reached out and stroked his neck, feeling the steady warmth of his body. The tension between them began to ease, not gone, but changed, as if something old and heavy had lifted a little. Della watched from the porch. "You see it now, don't you? The wild doesn't punish. It remembers. It waits." As the day wore on, Della taught Eleanor the rhythms of forest life, how to collect water from the spring, how to chop wood without wasting energy, how to listen for the movements of animals on the wind. There was a slow, deliberate wisdom in every gesture, a patience Eleanor had never known in her own world. During breaks, they sat on the porch, and Della told stories. Some whispered, some thundered. Tales of horse and wolf, of deals struck under moonlight, of humans who tried to bend the wild to their will and were undone by their own arrogance. "There's a price for breaking the pact," Della said one afternoon as rain pattered softly on the roof. "Not always the price you expect. Sometimes it's loneliness. Sometimes it's the loss of something precious, only realized after it's too late." Eleanor felt those words cut deeper than she cared to admit. She looked at Magnum, now dozing in a patch of sun, and wondered how many times she'd broken pacts, promises to herself, to others, to the world. She thought of the betrayal in her business, the way she'd closed herself off, hardened her heart, chosen dominance over connection. The cost was clear now: her isolation, her restless nights, her inability to trust. Caring for Magnum became a quiet ritual. She brushed his mane, tended to his hooves, and spoke to him in low, soothing tones. As she worked, fragments of memory rose up. Childhood afternoons spent riding, laughter with friends, the warmth of belonging. She realized she'd tried to bury those memories beneath ambition and control, afraid that feeling too much would lead to more pain. Now, in the stillness of the woods, she began to see the beauty in endurance, the strength in vulnerability. Magnum's quiet acceptance became a mirror for her own healing. He didn't judge, didn't resent, didn't hold on to the past the way she did. He simply existed, wary, patient, open to what each day brought. The wolves watched from the shadows, never approaching too close, but never fully leaving. Their presence was a silent reminder. Balance, not conquest. Eleanor found herself longing to understand their language, to decipher the unspoken rules that governed this hidden world. One evening, as dusk settled and the first stars pricked through the clouds, Eleanor joined Della by the fire. "What happens if someone refuses to change?" Eleanor asked quietly. Della's eyes glinted in the firelight. "Then the wild waits. It offers lessons over and over, until the stubborn heart breaks, or softens. Some people never learn. Some learn too late. But those who do..." She let the sentence trail off, gesturing to the dark trees beyond the window. "They find a kind of peace you can't buy or earn. You can only accept it." Later that night, Eleanor lay awake on the cot, listening to the quiet breaths of Magnum in the lean-to outside, the distant chorus of wolves, the steady drip of water from the eaves. She thought of all she'd lost, and all she might still find if she dared to let the old ways teach her. For the first time in years, she wanted to believe it was possible. She closed her eyes, and instead of restless worry, she pictured circles, hoofprints and pawprints, raindrops and rings of firelight, echoing out into the unknown, holding her safe. Days slipped by, marked not by emails or appointments, but by the slow arc of the sun and the hush of the forest. Eleanor moved through each morning in a way that was new and strangely comforting, rising with the pale light, stretching her stiff muscles, and wandering out to check on Magnum. She learned to breathe deeper, to listen for the world waking up, to let the quiet seep into her bones. The city's noise faded from her memory, replaced by the soft symphony of birdsong, wind, and the far-off, steady drumming of the river over rocks. Magnum was healing too. The horse had shed the nervous, haunted look he'd worn on the first day. Now, he greeted Eleanor with a gentle nudge and a spark in his eye, his trust returning little by little. They walked together beneath the trees, sometimes in silence, sometimes with Eleanor speaking softly, telling him stories, confessing old wounds, promising she would do better by him and by herself. One early morning, as a heavy mist clung to the ground, Eleanor saddled Magnum for the first time since everything had changed. She hesitated, heart thumping, but Magnum stood steady, patient. She swung onto his back and let him pick the path through dew-soaked ferns and mossy stumps, his gait sure and careful. The ride was slow, unhurried, the air tinged with the fresh promise of a world remade. As they moved, Eleanor caught glimpses of gray shapes darting between the trees, wolves, silent and observant, never too close, never too far. She felt no fear. Instead, a quiet awe settled in her chest. It was as if the wolves were guardians of some secret trial, measuring her not by her past, but by the choices she made now. On the third day, Eleanor found herself sitting by a fallen log with a mug of Della's herbal tea, lost in the dance of sunlight through the branches. She almost didn't hear the footsteps crunching in the underbrush. A steady, purposeful stride, different from the wild things she'd come to know. She stood, wary as a tall man in a park ranger's uniform appeared at the edge of the clearing. He was in his early 40s, rugged in that way only people who live close to the land become. His name tag read T. Wyatt. He tipped his hat. "Morning, I'm Ranger Tom Wyatt. Got a call about unusual activity in this sector. You wouldn't happen to be Eleanor Whitmore, would you?" Eleanor braced herself, half expecting suspicion or reproach. "That's me. I'm staying with Mrs. Delacroix." She gestured toward the cabin. Wyatt nodded. His gaze drifted to Magnum and then to the distant tree line, where a wolf's silhouette lingered before vanishing. "Unusual things happening out here lately. Wolves moving in packs where they shouldn't, horses showing up in places they don't belong. People in town are getting nervous. They say the forest is waking up." Eleanor felt a chill, but she met his gaze. "Maybe it is. Maybe it's been awake all along. We just stopped listening." Ranger Wyatt studied her, then shrugged, a half smile on his face. "Maybe so. Folks around here forget that the wild isn't something you can fence in or push away. It pushes back. You take care, Ms. Whitmore. The balance out here's fragile." As he disappeared down the path, Eleanor felt oddly reassured. The ranger's presence was a warning, yes, but it was also a reminder. She wasn't alone in her search for meaning. There were others who understood the delicate ties binding all living things. The days became a rhythm of gentle routines. Eleanor cleaned the cabin, helped Della gather herbs, tended to Magnum's small injuries, and learned to cook over an open fire. She found comfort in the simple acts, measuring flour, splitting wood, letting her mind drift without the constant background of regret. The silence grew companionable, not oppressive. Eleanor grew curious about the wolves. She watched as they sometimes approached the clearing at dusk, eyes glowing amber, their movements cautious but unthreatening. Della explained that the wolves watched over the land, that their presence was a sign the old ways still held sway. "The world's full of stories," Della said one night, as they shared a meal of roasted root vegetables and wild greens. "Most people want to control the ending, but the wild doesn't work that way. You get what you give. Respect, patience, courage. You learn to live with the wild, not above it." Eleanor nodded, thinking of the ambition that had once driven her. She remembered the ruthless choices she'd made in business, the bridges she'd burned, the way she'd seen others, partners, friends, even animals, as obstacles or assets, not companions. She saw the cracks in that old way of thinking now. The wild had forced her to slow down, to let go of the illusion of control. The wolves, she realized, lived in balance, never taking more than they needed, never acting out of spite. They hunted together, mourned together, survived together. She saw it in the way they moved as a single fluid unit, and in the rare, gentle moments when they played with each other among the ferns. Each sunrise ride with Magnum became a meditation, a reminder that healing was a slow, steady journey, not a victory to be seized in one grand gesture. Sometimes she spoke aloud to the forest, admitting her fears, her failures, her longing for redemption. Other times, she simply rode in silence, letting the land speak for itself. For the first time, Eleanor began to imagine a future that wasn't shaped by bitterness or regret, but by hope. She saw herself not as a conqueror of the wild, but as a humble participant, a student learning from the patience of the forest, the loyalty of a horse, the fierce integrity of wolves. And as dusk settled on another quiet day, Eleanor realized that she was slowly becoming whole. Not because she had mastered the wild, but because she had learned, finally, to listen. As the soft days of healing slipped by, Eleanor began to feel as if the world outside the forest had faded to a distant memory. The trees became her shelter, the hush of the undergrowth her peace. She had almost convinced herself that the troubles of her old life, the betrayals and cutthroat ambitions, belonged to someone else. But the wild, for all its peace, was never truly safe from the world of men. Shadows move even where sunlight filters through the trees. It started with a restlessness in the wolves. Their patterns changed. Where once they had circled the clearing only at dawn and dusk, now they lingered through midday, their movements anxious and sharp. Magnum, too, became jumpy, his ears twitching at sounds Eleanor could not hear. The forest itself felt tense, as if holding its breath. One evening, Della Crow appeared on the porch, her eyes narrowed with concern. She nodded toward the woods. They're troubled. Something's out there that shouldn't be. That night, Eleanor awoke to distant gunshots echoing through the hills, a harsh, foreign sound in a land of whispering leaves and wild calls. Magnum stomped restlessly in his pen. Eleanor dressed quickly and slipped outside, heart racing. Della was already waiting, lantern in hand. There are men in the woods, Della said grimly. Hunters. They're not after deer either. Word in town is they're after the wolves, maybe even your horse. Some see a wild thoroughbred and think it's a prize, something to take, not something to understand. The news sent a chill through Eleanor. Why now? She asked. Della's mouth twisted in a wry smile. The old ways make people nervous. The more they see what they don't understand, the more they want to destroy it. And they're telling stories in town, about me, about you. The witch and her ghost horse. That's what they're calling us now. Eleanor felt a surge of anger and fear. That's ridiculous. We haven't hurt anyone. Della shrugged, resigned. Truth doesn't always matter. People fear what they can't explain, and fear makes them dangerous. For the first time since coming to the forest, Eleanor realized she wasn't just a visitor. She had become part of something bigger, and now she was responsible for more than just her own mistakes. The next day, Ranger Tom Wyatt returned, his usually calm face set with worry. Miss Whitmore, you need to be careful. I've heard talk in town. Some fellas are planning to come out here, armed, looking for wolves, maybe more. The local folks are stirred up by all kinds of rumors. Eleanor swallowed hard, glancing at Della, who met her eyes with quiet resolve. What should we do? She asked. Wyatt hesitated, then lowered his voice. I can't stop every hunter from coming into the forest, but I can keep an eye out. Don't go wandering alone, and keep your horse close. Eleanor nodded, her mind racing with dread. That evening, she kept Magnum by the cabin, checking his halter and double-knotting every rope. Della mixed herbs and set charms on the windowsills. Old traditions, she said, for warding off ill intent. But the danger was not just in the woods. In town, the stories grew wilder. Eleanor overheard snippets when she drove in for supplies, about Della's curses, about a ghost horse seen running with wolves. Some said Eleanor had brought bad luck to the valley. Others whispered that the balance of the wild had been broken. The suspicion that once hovered at the edge of the community now crystallized into hostility. One evening, a group of men showed up at Della's door. Their faces were tight with suspicion, their voices rough with accusation. You don't belong here, one spat. You and that city woman, stirring up trouble, making the wolves bold. We want you gone. Della faced them without flinching. This land doesn't belong to any of us. We're only caretakers. But the men only scoffed, one stepping forward to jab a finger at Eleanor. People are scared. Animals acting strange. Wolves coming too close. Horses running wild. If anything happens to our livestock, it's on you." Eleanor stood her ground, her pulse thundering in her ears. "I haven't harmed anyone. Neither has Della. You're blaming what you don't understand." The men muttered among themselves, not satisfied but unwilling to escalate. They turned away, promising to return if anything else went wrong. After they left, Della slumped in her chair, looking older than Eleanor had ever seen her. "They're frightened," she said quietly. "Frightened people do stupid things." Eleanor sat with her, silence growing thick between them. The world felt smaller, tighter. The forest's peace had been pierced. That night, the wolves came close to the cabin, their eyes glinting in the moonlight, their bodies tense and alert. Magnum stood among them, strangely calm, as if drawing strength from their presence. Eleanor watched from the window, understanding that the fragile balance she had found here was under threat. She would have to decide, soon, if she could protect it. Sleep did not come easily. Eleanor lay awake, listening to the distant howls and the restless shifting of wolves and horse. In the darkness, she realized how much she had changed. The person she once was would have run, would have hidden from the fear and anger closing in. But now, a new determination grew within her. She would not abandon the wild, not Magnum, not Della, not the wolves. Whatever came, she would face it with open eyes. Outside, the shadows stretched long across the clearing. The forest was watching, and this time, Eleanor would not turn away. Morning broke with a chill so sharp it stung Eleanor's skin. A heavy mist curled along the forest floor, muffling sound and blurring the boundaries between earth and sky. The air felt thick with waiting, like the moment before a storm when the whole world seems to hold its breath. Eleanor dressed quickly, her mind racing through every warning from Ranger Tom, every uneasy glance from the townsfolk. The sense of threat was no longer just rumor. It was real, as present as the wolves' anxious pacing outside the cabin. She watched Magnum graze beneath the dripping trees, the horse calm but wary, flanked by 2 sentinel wolves. Their presence gave her a sense of safety, but she knew it wouldn't last if men with guns and fear in their hearts arrived. Inside the cabin, Della Crow was already at work. She moved with purpose, laying out old hunting traps, lengths of sturdy rope, and an ancient leather satchel filled with herbs and odd trinkets. "It's time, Eleanor," she said, her voice low but steady. "If we run, we lose everything. If we stay, we need to stand together. Horse, wolf, human. The old pact isn't just words. It's action." Eleanor's hands shook as she poured herself coffee. "What can I do? I'm not a fighter." Della gave her a rare smile. "You're braver than you think. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right, even when you're terrified." They spent the morning preparing the land around the cabin. Eleanor and Della wove branches into false trails, scattered pungent herbs to mask the scent of wolves and horse, and hid snares in places only the animals would know to avoid. Della whispered to the wolves as they watched, as if passing instructions from some older, wilder wisdom. Eleanor marveled at how the pack seemed to understand, their golden eyes tracking every move. By midday, the wind shifted and carried voices through the trees, men's voices, rough and urgent. Eleanor's heart seized. She hurried to Magnum, pressing her face into his mane, trying to steady her breath. "You'll be safe," she whispered. "I promise." At that moment, Ranger Tom Wyatt appeared on the edge of the clearing, gun holstered but hand resting on the grip. He looked tired, haunted by the tension in the air. "Hunters are coming up the North Trail," he said in a hushed voice. "I bought us some time, but they're determined. They want your horse, and they want the wolves gone." Eleanor nodded, eyes shining with resolve. "Will you help us?" Tom hesitated, then gave a tight nod. "I'll do what I can. I can't let them destroy the balance here." Together, the three of them, an unlikely alliance of city woman, forest witch, and government ranger, spread out across the land. Tom created diversions, doubling back along the main path and leaving false boot prints in the mud. Della set more charms, symbols made of bone and twine, hung from tree limbs where sunlight could catch them. Eleanor, guided by the wolves, found places to hide and safe trails that zigzagged between dense thickets and mossy stones. The tension grew as the sun dipped lower. From the ridge above, Eleanor spotted the hunters moving in. 3 men in heavy boots and camouflage, rifles slung over their shoulders. Their faces were hard, eyes sharp with suspicion. They fanned out, calling to each other, scanning the brush for movement. Magnum stood perfectly still in a shadowy patch between 2 oaks, head low, his coat blending with the bark. The wolves melted into the forest, visible only to those who knew where to look. Suddenly, a branch snapped. The nearest hunter raised his rifle, eyes wild. "There! I saw something move!" he yelled. Eleanor's pulse hammered. She stepped out from behind a tree, heart pounding, voice steady. "It's just me. Don't shoot." The men lowered their weapons, only slightly. "What are you doing out here, lady? Looking for trouble?" Eleanor met their eyes, refusing to be cowed. "This is protected land. You're trespassing." The tallest man sneered. "Protected? From what? Wolves? We're doing you a favor. That horse doesn't belong out here. None of this does." Della stepped forward then, her presence commanding, even in her patched coat and muddy boots. "The land belongs to itself. You don't understand what you're risking." The men laughed. "Old witch, you and your stories. Stay out of our way." Eleanor could feel the pressure building, a standoff that might end in violence at any moment. She looked to Ranger Tom, who had flanked the group and now stood at their backs, hand on his holster. "Enough!" Eleanor called, her voice ringing through the trees. "You think you're protecting your homes, but you're destroying what keeps this land alive. The wolves are part of the balance. So is the horse. If you kill them, you break something you'll never be able to fix." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, a chorus of howls rose from the trees, close, insistent. The wolves stepped into view, not aggressive but formidable, forming a wide half-circle behind Eleanor and Della. Magnum moved to stand beside her, calm and unflinching. The hunters stared, uncertain now. "Let's go," one muttered. But the leader shook his head. "No, we came for that horse." Ranger Tom finally stepped forward, badge gleaming. "This land is under my jurisdiction. Leave now, or answer to the law." Faced with the unified front, woman, ranger, witch, wolves, and horse, the hunters hesitated. Anger flared, but fear won out. One by one, they lowered their weapons and backed away, muttering threats that dissolved in the wind. When they were gone, Eleanor sagged against Magnum, relief making her knees weak. Della put a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You did it," she whispered. "You stood for the wild." Eleanor looked around at the wolves, at Magnum, at Tom and Della, and understood for the first time what true courage meant. Not domination, but protection. Not conquest, but unity. She had helped break a cycle older than herself, a cycle of fear, violence, and misunderstanding. As night fell, the forest breathed easier, for now the wild was safe, and Eleanor, no longer running from her past, stood at the center of the clearing, changed at last by the choice to stay. Twilight bled into the forest, painting everything in a smoky, purple haze. The tension of the day still clung to Eleanor's skin as she stood with Magnum beneath the tall pines. Della moved quietly around the cabin, lighting small candles and muttering words that seemed half prayer, half warning. Ranger Tom lingered by the edge of the clearing, scanning the woods with a wary eye, every line of his body etched with caution. But it was the wolves who sensed the coming storm first. Their leader, the scarred gray wolf, padded into the open with his pack behind him. They didn't slink in the shadows as before. They came forward openly, tails high, their golden eyes glinting with purpose. The pack fanned out to form a living barrier, flanking Eleanor, Magnum, Della, and Tom, as if to say, "This is our line. Here the wild holds." Night came fast, the clouds bruised and low. In the hush, every sound carried: an owl's cry, the snap of a twig, Eleanor's own heartbeat thudding like thunder in her ears. Lantern light glowed from the cabin windows, but the world outside felt huge and haunted, on the edge of violence and magic. The first sign of the hunter's return was a distant shout, echoing through the trees, angry and afraid. Eleanor tensed, clutching Magnum's mane for courage. Della came to stand beside her, her old hands steady and fierce. Tom checked his radio, then shook his head. The signal was dead. Whatever happened tonight, they would face it alone. The wolves gathered, forming a protective crescent between the humans and the dark woods. The lead wolf glanced at Eleanor, holding her gaze with a look that was almost human, measured, searching, as if weighing her soul. Footsteps. 3, 4, 5 men, flashlights bouncing, rifles gleaming in the gloom. Their boots churned up leaves and mud as they marched into the clearing, faces twisted with fear and fury. The leader, broad-shouldered, jaw tight, pointed his gun at Magnum. "There's the horse! Step aside now!" he barked. Tom raised a hand. "You're trespassing on federal land. Lower your weapons and leave." The men ignored him, eyes darting between the wolves and the humans. "Get out of the way. That horse is dangerous. Those wolves will kill our livestock." Della stood firm, her voice calm as stone. "The wolves only kill to survive. The horse is not yours to claim." The standoff crackled with danger. Eleanor felt every muscle in her body tense, but this time she didn't back down. She took a step forward, placing herself between Magnum and the hunters. "You'll have to go through me," she said, her voice ringing in the cold air. For a heartbeat, silence. The hunters glanced at each other, uncertainty flickering. Then the leader stepped closer, gun raised. "Don't make me do something you'll regret." The wolves answered. They surged forward, not attacking, but surrounding the clearing with a wave of gray and silver, hackles raised, fangs bared. Their presence was a warning, a promise of consequences. Tom drew his sidearm, not to threaten, but to show he would not stand aside. "No more," he said quietly. "This ends tonight." The hunters hesitated. The magic of the forest, the unity of woman, horse, wolves, and the old ways held them back. One man began to lower his weapon. "This is crazy. Let's just go." But the leader wouldn't give up. "I'm not afraid of old stories," he spat, "or witches, or wolves." He fired a warning shot into the air. The crack shattered the night. Magnum startled, but Eleanor gripped his halter, refusing to move. The wolves snapped to attention, their eyes burning with wild intelligence. Della stepped forward, her voice cutting through the chaos. You are not the only ones who know fear, but you must choose. Keep fighting the wild, or accept your place in it. Leave now, and no harm will come. The men faltered, suddenly aware that the forest itself had turned against them. The wind howled through the trees, carrying the wolves' chorus, an ancient, unbroken call. The leader's hand shook. He dropped his rifle and stumbled backward, cursing. One by one, the hunters retreated, their bravado collapsing. The wolves tracked their every move until they vanished into the night, swallowed by the wild. When silence fell, Eleanor let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She turned to Magnum, pressing her forehead to his. It's over. You're free. Slowly, with hands trembling but sure, she untied Magnum's halter and slipped it off, letting the horse stand loose for the first time since she'd brought him here. He tossed his head, eyes bright with something new, pride, perhaps, or understanding. He walked to the center of the clearing, then paused, looking back at Eleanor, Della, and Tom. The wolves formed a circle around him, not trapping, but welcoming. In that moment, Eleanor saw the wild's true face, not chaos, but harmony. She realized that every fear she'd carried, of betrayal, of failure, of not belonging, was small compared to the strength of standing together. Tom clapped her on the shoulder. You did it. You stood your ground. Della smiled, her eyes shining in the lantern light. The wild remembers, Eleanor. Tonight, you chose to protect, not to possess. That's what breaks the old cycle. Eleanor felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She looked around, at the wolves, at the horse she'd tried to abandon but now set free, at the two unlikely friends who had risked everything for the wild. She knew she was changed, in ways she couldn't yet name. The night grew quiet again. The wolves faded back into the forest, their work done. Magnum lingered, watching Eleanor with gentle eyes as if waiting for her blessing. For the first time in her life, Eleanor felt not alone, but at home, bound by courage, by choice, and by the wild heart she'd finally found. By dawn, the violence and fear of the night before felt almost like a bad dream, except for the new strength Eleanor felt pulsing quietly beneath her ribs. She rose before the sun, wrapped herself in a blanket, and watched the first gentle light spill across the clearing. Magnum grazed in the dew-soaked grass, untethered, surrounded by the footprints of wolves. The forest seemed to breathe with relief, as if every tree and creature sensed that something sacred had been preserved. Inside the cabin, Della was already making tea, her movements slow but content. Tom sat at the table, running a hand through his hair, eyes red but bright. I stayed the night, he said quietly. Didn't think it was right to leave you all alone, not after. He trailed off, but the gratitude in his voice needed no explanation. Eleanor nodded. I'm glad you stayed. I don't think I could have faced that alone. She stepped outside, mug in hand, and stood in the fresh morning air. The town below the forest, so often a source of trouble and suspicion, felt far away now. But Eleanor knew the news would travel fast. People would talk about the standoff, the wolves, the witch, and her ghost horse. Rumors would swirl, as they always did. But this time, the story would be different. Late that morning, the first townspeople arrived at the forest's edge. They didn't come with guns or torches. Instead, they came in quiet clusters, drawn by curiosity and a cautious hope. Word had spread. of Eleanor's bravery, of the strange alliance between human and wild, of the hunters who had retreated without a single shot fired at the animals. Some came just to see the wolves, others out of worry for what might come next. Eleanor met them with Tom and Della at her side. At first, no one spoke. Then a young boy stepped forward, tugging his father's sleeve. "Dad, look, the horse is still here, and the wolves didn't hurt him." The crowd murmured, uncertain. One of the older men, a rancher with sun-creased skin, raised his hat. "Ma'am, I've lived near these woods my whole life. I've lost sheep to wolves, but I never saw them act like this. What did you do out here?" Eleanor felt their eyes on her, searching for something she wasn't sure she possessed. She drew a breath, steady and clear, and spoke from the place inside her that had learned to trust the wild. "We protected the balance," she said. "We stopped seeing the forest as something to conquer or something to fear. The wolves aren't monsters. They're guardians. Magnum wasn't just a stray horse. He's a bridge between our world and theirs. We stood together because we realized we're part of something bigger. And last night, we proved that it's possible to live in harmony with this place, if we choose respect over fear." A silence hung over the group, heavy and thoughtful. Some people nodded, others glanced away, uncomfortable with ideas that challenged old grudges. But a few stepped forward, curious, even hopeful. Della addressed the crowd in her steady, wise voice. "The old stories say we live in circles. What we do to the land, we do to ourselves. When we break the circle, pain comes back to us. When we honor it, everything thrives." Tom chimed in, his badge glinting in the sun. "We can't go back to the way things were, but we can choose what comes next. We can protect these woods and the creatures in them. That's what real stewardship looks like." As the day went on, more people arrived. Teachers, ranchers, even the town's mayor. Some asked questions, some just listened. A group of teenagers snapped photos of Magnum grazing side by side with the wolves, posting them online with hashtags like Ghost Horse and Wild Harmony. The story began to spread beyond the valley, capturing the imagination of people who'd never set foot in the Black Pines. Slowly, the town's mood shifted. Instead of fear, people started to feel pride. Eleanor found herself approached by a teacher who asked if she'd talk to her class about what had happened. The mayor proposed a meeting to discuss how the forest could be better protected, maybe even turned into a wildlife sanctuary. Della received visitors at her cabin for the first time in years, people wanting to hear her stories, to ask about the circle, to learn old ways. For Eleanor, every moment felt like a second chance. She threw herself into the new routines: sunrise rides on Magnum, meetings with townspeople, long walks with Tom through the woods to check for signs of poachers or new animal tracks. She started using her business acumen for good, organizing fundraisers, connecting the town with conservation organizations, helping draft plans to ensure the balance would last. At dusk, she found herself riding Magnum at the edge of the woods, watching the wolves play in the clearing below. She realized that the line between wild and human had blurred, not erased, but respected. The forest would always be a place of mystery and risk, but it was also now a place of community and hope. One evening, as the sky turned gold and the air grew still, Della joined Eleanor on the porch. "You've given this place a new story," Della said softly, "one where fear gives way to understanding." Eleanor smiled, watching as Magnum nuzzled a wolf pup in the grass. "I think this place gave me a new story too." In that moment, Eleanor understood that real harmony was never about taming the wild. It was about honoring its rhythms and choosing day by day to be a part of its circle. She was no longer a stranger here. She was a guardian, an advocate, and, at last, at home. The weeks following the night of reckoning moved with a new energy through the valley. It was as if the story of Eleanor, Magnum, Della, Tom, and the wolves had become a legend in real time, passed from one front porch to another, shared in the grocery store and whispered in the schoolyard. For the first time in years, the town wasn't united by fear or gossip, but by the echo of something mysterious and beautiful. People started to look at the forest and each other with fresh eyes. Eleanor found herself at the center of it all, not as a target, but as a bridge. She had become someone people came to with questions, hopes, even apologies. She welcomed it, though the change didn't come without struggle. There were still skeptical voices, old grudges, and those who clung to the comfort of anger. But something had shifted, and Eleanor felt it every time she rode Magnum along the trails or walked into town with her head high. One afternoon, the mayor organized a town hall meeting in the old school gym. The place was packed. Ranchers, teachers, high school kids, even the hunters who'd stormed the woods that night. At first, the tension in the room was thick enough to touch. But as the meeting began, people leaned in, eager to understand how things had changed and what the future might hold. When Eleanor was invited to speak, she stood behind the battered wooden podium and let her gaze drift across the faces, some wary, some hopeful, many uncertain. She didn't have a prepared speech. Instead, she let the lessons of the wild speak through her. "I came here running from a life that taught me to win at any cost," she began, voice steady. "I thought control was strength and vulnerability was a weakness. The wild showed me something different. Out there, survival isn't about domination. It's about humility, respect, and learning when to let go." She paused, looking down at her hands, remembering the night she had abandoned Magnum and the fear that had haunted her since. "I tried to escape my mistakes, but this place, and the creatures who call it home, made me face them. I saw how everything is connected. Wolves, horses, trees, people. When we try to break the circle, we hurt ourselves most of all. Real strength comes from compassion, not control. From partnership, not possession." A silence fell over the room, the kind that only comes when the truth is laid bare. Eleanor continued, her words slow but sure. "We're all afraid of losing something, our livelihoods, our land, our place in the world. But if we let fear rule us, we end up destroying what makes us strong, our community, our land, our ability to hope. I learned from the wild that healing isn't about erasing pain or pretending it never happened. It's about facing it, forgiving ourselves, and daring to do better." She shared how she'd watched the wolves care for each other, how they hunted together, played together, grieved together. How she'd seen Magnum survive not through aggression, but by standing in quiet dignity, earning respect from the very creatures she'd once feared. "We need to protect this place, not just for the animals, but for ourselves, because the lessons out there are lessons we all need. They teach us to listen, to respect, to adapt. If we honor the wild, we honor our own humanity." Tom stood next and added his voice, explaining how easy it was to forget the delicate balance that sustained the valley. "We're not above nature," he said. "We're a part of it, and our job is to protect it, not conquer it." Della spoke too, telling stories that were half memory, half myth, of cycles and pacts, of the price paid when arrogance blinds compassion. "We forget the wild at our own peril, but we remember it with humility, and it gives us a place to belong." After the meeting, people lingered in small groups, talking more quietly, asking questions, making plans. Some of the older men and women admitted they'd never really understood what the wolves meant to the land. A few of the hunters approached Eleanor and Tom, asking to learn more about the old ways, the balance, the new future for the forest. The next day, Eleanor took a long ride with Magnum. The woods felt different, more alive, more welcoming. She saw evidence of change everywhere: townspeople clearing up old trash, children helping to repair broken fences so the deer could move safely. Someone had left wildflowers at the edge of Della's property, a quiet thank you. As the sun dipped low, Eleanor found herself alone by the river, reflecting on her journey. She thought of all she had learned, the hard lessons about control and humility, about forgiveness and courage. She realized the forest had not simply healed her, but had given her the tools to help others heal too. She closed her eyes, letting the wind carry the memory of the wolves' song through her. Compassion, not dominance. Respect, not fear. Connection, not isolation. Eleanor understood, finally, that facing her shadows had given her back her light. She thought of the town, changed but still learning, still growing. She knew there would be setbacks, but also hope. She led Magnum home in the gathering dark, grateful for the wild and all it had taught her. She no longer saw herself as separate or lost. She was part of the circle now, responsible, humble, ready to help others see the beauty and strength that come when we choose partnership over power. Months passed, and the seasons changed, painting the black pines in wild, shifting colors. Spring brought a rush of green that swept over the valley, washing away the scars of winter and the memories of that night when everything had nearly been lost. The town, the forest, and Eleanor herself all bloomed with new life. Eleanor's days began before sunrise now, in the hush that comes just before the birds begin their song. She would step outside, feeling the dew on the grass, and breathe in the wild scent of pine and promise. Magnum would be waiting at the gate, no longer wary, but proud and calm. He'd nuzzle her shoulder as she saddled him, both of them finding comfort in a morning ritual that felt timeless. She was a different person now, quieter, more open, more rooted. The lessons of the wild had settled deep inside her. She worked not just for herself, but for the valley, for the creatures whose survival was linked to her own. Her days were filled with meetings, letters, and phone calls as she worked to secure protections for the forest, to ensure what had been learned here would not be forgotten when memory faded or fear crept back in. Eleanor had become the face of the new conservation effort. With Tom's support and Della's wisdom, she helped launch a preservation campaign that drew attention from state officials, environmental groups, and even national media. Visitors arrived, curious about the circle story, the businesswoman who'd become an advocate, the wolves who guarded a horse, the valley that chose balance over conflict. Some came for answers, some for inspiration, some for the simple hope that people in the wild could find peace. One morning, Eleanor hosted a tour for a group of students from the city. They gathered by the riverbank, their faces bright with curiosity, asking questions about the wolves, about Magnum, about what had really happened that night. Eleanor knelt in the grass, showing them paw prints and hoof prints side by side in the mud. She explained, "What you see here isn't magic or legend. It's partnership. The wolves aren't enemies. They're part of the balance. Magnum isn't just a survivor. He's a reminder that when we choose to respect the wild, we all thrive. Nature isn't a thing to control. It's a circle to join with humility and courage." Della often joined Eleanor on these outings, sharing stories that mixed fact and fable, teaching the children to listen for the forest's voice. Tom patrolled the trails, his presence a reassurance that the law now served the land as much as the people. Over time, the town's fears softened into pride. Businesses adapted, offering eco-tours and local crafts. The old divisions between ranchers and environmentalists, between townsfolk and outsiders, faded as everyone found common ground in their shared home. As summer deepened, Eleanor and Magnum often rode at dawn. On these rides, Eleanor would sometimes spot the wolves, always watching, sometimes playing in the long grass, their pups tumbling after butterflies. Magnum would pause, ears pricked, and the wolves would meet his gaze before melting back into the trees. In those moments, Eleanor felt a connection deeper than words, a sense that she was exactly where she was meant to be. One morning, she rode to the highest ridge at sunrise. From there, she could see the whole valley spread out below, fields of wildflowers, the winding river, the rooftops of the town nestled at the edge of the wild. She remembered the woman she had once been, driven, angry, convinced that power meant never admitting weakness. She remembered the day she tried to leave Magnum behind, how that one act of fear had led her here, to this place of grace and responsibility. As the sun crested the trees, Eleanor whispered a promise. To Magnum, to the wolves, to the land itself. "I won't forget," she said softly. "I'll honor the circle. I'll choose respect. I'll protect what matters, not just for myself, but for everyone who comes after." That day, a new conservation agreement was signed at the town hall, with Eleanor standing beside Tom, Della, the mayor, and many others. It was more than just a piece of paper. It was a vow, a new covenant, that the valley would remain a sanctuary, its wild heart protected by the very people who had once feared it most. Eleanor felt the weight of the pen in her hand as she signed. It felt less like a burden and more like a blessing, a chance to begin again, every day, with the courage to do better. After the ceremony, she rode Magnum through the town's main street. Children waved, townspeople cheered, and a pack of wolves watched from the edge of the woods. The world had changed, not just for Eleanor, but for everyone. There were still problems, still old wounds, but now there was also hope, a living reminder that redemption is always possible when we choose partnership over dominance, humility over pride, and love over fear. That evening, as dusk gathered and the first stars shone, Eleanor rode out once more. She let Magnum have his head, galloping across the open meadow, wind in her hair. She felt the wolves running beside them, silent and sure, the old stories alive in every footfall. And as she slowed, letting Magnum walk beneath the moonlit pines, Eleanor understood what the wild had been trying to teach her all along. True power is not found in the ability to control, but in the willingness to listen, to respect, to protect. The circle endures when we choose to honor it, when we accept that we are only a part of something ancient and whole. Redemption, she knew now, begins with a single choice: to do what is right, even when it is hard. It grows each time we choose courage, humility, and love. And in the wild, beneath the endless sky, Eleanor felt finally at peace, forever a guardian of the circle. Her heart open to all that would come next,